This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 496, Getting Back to Drupal Basics. On today's show, we're talking about Drupal Basics, why we got away from them, and what we can do to bring them back with our guest, Mike Anello. We'll also cover Entity Reference Override as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today, our guest is Mike Anello. OpenAI says Mike Anello, Mike, is a seasoned Drupal developer with over 15 years of experience. He specializes in Drupal consulting and training through his business, Drupal Easy, ensuring clients leverage Drupal's full potential. Mike is a notable community contributor and advocate, sharing his expertise and insights widely. Mike Anello, as always, thank you for joining us and welcome back to the show.
Lovely to rejoin you all. Thanks for having me.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for the next 4 weeks. Old friend of mine, Kathy Beck, Senior UX Engineer at Oomph. Kathy Beck is a senior UX engineer at Oomph Inc., specializing in Drupal site building, front-end development, and accessibility. As the company's accessibility subject matter expert, she ensures digital experiences are inclusive and user-friendly. Kathy is also dedicated to fostering an inclusive workplace and advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives as a member of Oomph's DEIB advisory board. Kathy Beck, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And last, but certainly not least, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development. Nick, what's going on?
Not too much. Happy to be here. Got my window open. The weather's finally turned here in New England, so enjoying
Uh,
as much as I can.
Nick, you don't have to worry. My cold is not going to come through the microphone. You'll be okay. I immediately apologize to our listeners for my wretched voice, but we're just going to try to power through today. And as we do, let's now turn it over to for our module of the week to Martin Anderson Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you got for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to replace a text field on entities you reference in your Drupal site? There's a module for that. It's called Entity Reference Override, and it was created in September of 2016 by Jeff Eaton, though recent releases are by Benjamin Melanson of Agaric. It has a 2.0.0 beta 3 version available, which works with Drupal 10.1 or 11. It is actively maintained, has opted into security coverage, but needs a stable release. Does have test coverage and a user guide available, which also includes a tutorial video. Now, it has 13 open issues, 2 of which are bugs against the 2.0 branch, which is pretty good considering the module is officially in use by over 2,000 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, the module defines a new field type with associated widgets and formatters. Your site editors will see a normal text or normal entity reference field, either autocomplete or select, with an additional text field. Text provided in that additional field can be used to override a specific field in the referenced entity's display or add a class to its rendered markup. This could be handy in use cases like showing people with project-specific roles or showing related articles with a summary tweaked to be more relevant to the main content being viewed. It's not a super common need, but if you need this capability, it can save having to set up a more complicated content architecture with some kind of intermediary entity. I thought this module would be interesting because today's guest, Mike Anello, is listed as one of the maintainers. So, Mike, can you tell us about your history with the module and how you've used it?
Yeah, this is pretty funny because when I first looked at our rundown and saw that module, I'm like, that module seems familiar. And after I looked at the project page, I was like, oh, because I'm a maintainer. This is one of those project or co-maintainer, I should say, and very inactive co-maintainer. Let me just add that tag on as well. This is one of those modules, and I'm sure, everyone here has probably been in this situation. Once you are once you start maintaining modules or start contributing in a lot of different places, every now and then when you actually open up a merge request or active an issue queue, sooner or later, the maintainer's going to come by and be like, hey, do you want to be a maintainer? Do you want to help me out? Do you want to be a maintainer? And sometimes they ask that question, you have a chance to respond. Sometimes they just make you a co-maintainer. I think this is the case for this module. I did use this module for a large client, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, modern Drupal era. And I specifically needed the use case where we were selecting an entity reference, but we just needed a little snippet of information to go to kind of travel along with the reference. And honestly, I don't remember what the exact use case was or what that little information was, but um, it was something that was small enough so that we weren't going to create a new fieldable entity to act on the in between where we can add all kinds of fields and data. We just need like a little bit of plain text to go along with it. And
Yeah.
at the time, this module, I don't know if maybe it just wasn't compatible with Drupal 9 at the time, and I did the work to get it compatible, something like that. Not very heavy lifting, just enough to get it into a stable shape for my client. But it's a great little module. I actually um, I mention stuff like this every now and then when I teach reference fields because I use the analogy of um, like in sports, you have a player fieldable entity and a team fieldable entity, and you can relate a player to a team. But there's so much more information about that relationship, right? There's like, when was the contract signed? What years did they play for that team? That's all information about the relationship, not about the team or the player. So this is just a much lighter version of that, where you want to just add some information about that relationship that's not specific to either side of it.
Yeah, this is one of those modules where if I had a use case for it, I would create that intermediary like contract entity or something, the relationship signifier and just go that like I wouldn't even think to look for a module for it because I wouldn't think that you could make it generic enough to be useful. So this is a good one to keep in mind. Like if you just need to override a label or something or make it a little bit nicer, it seems like this really solves an issue elegantly. But
Yeah,
I would have never have thought to look for it.
yeah. I mean, the project I was working on had just dozens of fieldable entities. I think we had a custom entity type as well, and we were trying to not have to add more. So, and
Yep.
it was just we just needed a little bit of descriptive text on one particular relationship, and this worked great, and it's still in use. So, I mean, we've been
Mm.
using it for years. So it's when you need it, you need it.
Yeah. I feel like you could essentially maybe use this in like an events website too. Like one use case that came to mind immediately for me was like, oh, maybe you have a speaker and a session, right? And like the session is referenced to the speaker, and the speaker has a bunch of other fields on it that you need: first name, last name, social media stuff, right? But then maybe you want to update that speaker's bio a little bit to be more specific to that event or that topic that they're speaking on, right? This could be a good use case for that, where you're like, oh, let me put in their custom bio as opposed to their generalized bio from their
Yeah.
user profile. But um I like the fact that Mike Anello is like an honorable mention maintainer of this module. I think that's an interesting subset of maintainership.
That's a that's a
Mhm.
that's the perfect phrase for it. At this point, I'm definitely an honorable mention.
All right. Well, Martin, as always, thanks for pulling out a topical module of the week. If folks wanted to suggest their own or just chit chat about modules, where could they go about doing that?
We are always happy to talk about interesting projects and candidates for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as Man Clue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Martin.
All right, see you next week.
On May 2nd, we're recording episode 500. Oh boy. We have a special guest. Yep, you guessed it. It's going to be you. If you're interested in being on episode 500, Visit talkingdrupal.com/show 500. That's SHOW 500 to learn more. Everyone is welcome. All right. Let's jump into our primary topic. And Mike, we're kind of talking about getting back to Drupal basics. And you and I kind of had a brief conversation about this at Drupal Camp, New Jersey. And I was kind of like, oh, yeah, you know what? You have a great point there. But I'm just interested in, like, can you give a little bit more background as to where this idea came from, kind of how you've been thinking about this? And that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. It was very unexpected. It just kind of landed in my lap and kind of just resonated with me and you know bugged me enough. So I just got just a little bit worked up about it. So what had happened was, as part of the long form training classes that I do, we have weekly office hours throughout the year for alumni and current students. And it was during one of these office hours, and I believe it was in the weeks after Florida Drupal Camp, which was in February of this year. It's in February of every year, let's be honest. But and I was during one of these office hours, and normally after I attend one of these events during office hours, I'll let folks know like sessions I thought that were particularly useful that they might want to watch the recording of. And one of our beginner students asked me, and this was while it was right in the middle of the course. The course is going on. I think it was probably right after the views lesson or one of our views lessons. And one of our beginner students asked, "Were there any views related sessions?" And I was like, "Hmm, no, there definitely weren't." And then it got me thinking, like, I haven't seen just like a how to use views or even an intermediate views related session at a Drupal event for a really long time, like years easily. Um, and then that got me thinking even more, like, we're from a technical side as a community, like we are doing things to encourage new people to Drupal, primarily Drupal CMS. Like we are building things that will be attractive to new Drupal users. Um, and that's something that as a community we've always done really well. Like we can write stuff, we can write code, we can build stuff. The stuff that we don't do really well, and we're desperately trying to get better at, is the soft skills, is the marketing or the how do we like reach out and introduce people to Drupal. Um, and I've always been a big, obviously a big promoter of Drupal events, and it got me thinking, like, if we're making all this technical effort to build Drupal CMS and make Drupal easy to use, um, when people discover Drupal and they come to an event, we've currently, and I'm going to speak very generally here, we've got nothing for them at Drupal events. And I'll put a little asterisk there because I'm sure there's some Drupal events that have beginner sessions here and there. Definitely beginner events that do intro to Drupal courses, full day workshops. But as far as sessions, people just come for that full day of sessions. In my, you know, as far as what I've seen, there's very few like, here's how to use Drupal. Here's how to slap a field on something. Here's how to use views. Here's how the taxonomies. There's very few sessions like that. And so these folks who are hoping to bring into the community through Drupal CMS, if they decide to take the next step, which we definitely want them to do, and come to a Drupal event, they're going to look at the sessions and be like, I don't know what to do here.
Yep.
So, yeah, that really kind of struck me that, oh man, we need, you know, we need solutions on the non-technical side as well as the technical side if we want to grow the community. And that's kind of the bit that got me going on this and worked up about it.
And I'm curious as you're talking through this because
Yeah.
Views was kind of instrumental into my Drupal journey, right? It
Yeah.
allows you to create filter pages. I think I still maintain Views is one of the greatest pieces of the Drupal ecosystem, even if I sometimes don't go to it first anymore. But how do you even have I feel like a Views beginner intro session has to be like Like, how do you even go about presenting that?
Right,
Because it does so much. Like, you can't even talk about relationships, I feel like,
right.
in an intro to views.
Ri
How do you even think you would
well,
approach
no,
that?
there's prerequisite knowledge there for sure, but that's how this whole thing kind of started growing in my head, and then I started talking to some people about it, and, right now, I just don't have the bandwidth to, like, do anything official at this point and really organize stuff. Um, but I have talked to a lot of people about it. I've talked to other trainers. I'm not gonna mention any names because I don't know if they want, their names out there. I've talked to other trainers. I've talked to other, like, prolific Drupal contributors/presenters, slash presenters, um, and pretty much everyone I've talked to has agreed that, yes, this is a problem, and yes, they wanna be involved. Um, so, like, obviously, you wouldn't throw a complete, beginner into a views workshop. I mean, the foundational knowledge, in my opinion, is, the Drupal field system and just basic Drupal information
Yeah.
architecture. Understanding you can slap fields on everything, you can establish relationships between everything. You gotta get that foundation before you can go to views. Um, yeah, I think I answered your question. I could keep talking about
Yeah.
this, but I'll
Yeah,
try and
no,
stick
no,
to the structure that we've laid out in the document.
and you mentioned Drupal CMS is kind and, the training question is kind of the impetus for this, but
Yeah.
why else do you think this type of content is needed?
Well, because we wanna grow, we need to grow the community. It's no longer we want to, right? We have to. You go to a Drupal event and, the average age is, it's only going one direction right now, and we need to at least level that out. If not, not have it, start getting younger at some point. So we definitely need to grow the community. We definitely need to grow new Drupal developers, and we need to give them an on-ramp. Like, we need to give them a reasonable on-ramp by providing, resources that makes it easy for them to start leveling up. And if we just give them Drupal CMS, we give them some documentation on Drupal.org, and then, you know, nothing after that, and they come to a Drupal event, that's a big step going from, like,
Yeah.
basic Drupal knowledge to, intermediate topics. And I think it's kind of this has been going on in the Drupal community for a while, and I've talked to folks about this before. I feel like there's a mindset at Drupal events where folks will only submit a session proposal if it's something new and novel, right? Which is great. We need that stuff. But I also think we need the basics. Like, we need
Yeah.
really good presenters, you know, presenting foundational knowledge so that we can level these new people that we're trying to bring in. We can level them up to the point where they can actually sit in on a new and novel presentation and understand what's going on. But
Well, it's a
I feel
chicken
like,
and egg problem too,
yeah,
right? Because if you don't have the new people to Drupal coming to the events, then
yeah,
you're not gonna have an audience for those sessions either, but if you're not providing those
right,
sessions, they're not gonna like, I mean, some of the most
Yeah, but
transformative camps I went to were the the basic things that I learned at Design for Drupal, right?
right,
Because it was just teaching me things that about Drupal that I had no idea. Like a lot of the stuff I go to now is like, well, I could figure this out if I sat down for a couple of days and figured it out. But it's nice to know what
right.
other people are doing. Um,
so
but yeah, no, this is fascinating.
I think it's also a framing thing, Nick, right? So, like, if you say to somebody, hey, do a beginner session, right? Or you accept a beginner session at your event and not a lot of people show up in the room, right? Like, I don't think that, obviously as a presenter, that's not a great feeling, but I also think like most camps are recording those sessions, right? So like then you have that recording that could be helpful to a great number more people, right? So I think like you definitely want to frame it in that way as well when thinking about this stuff is like, hey, you might not have a ton of people in that room listening to your session, but if it's recorded and shared, like you're gonna definitely help people outside of the sphere of whatever event you're speaking at.
And if they get to that recording, they're more likely to go to the event next year, knowing that there's events and sessions that they can relate to and get involved in. So,
I think there's another aspect to it as well. By offering this beginner track or beginner sessions. That actually helps on the marketing side of things as well.
Mm,
Because then the camp is able to go out to community organizations, local universities, local high schools, coding clubs, local PHP groups, and say, hey, come to this camp. If you're new to Drupal, that's fine. We've got a beginner track for you. So come to the beginner track, meet the community. Um,
yeah.
so it is a chicken and egg situation. I'm not disagreeing with you, Nick, but I'm definitely biased where we need to provide, and I don't know how this analogy is going to work. It's breaking down in my head. We need to provide the chicken, right, and then the eggs will come. Or we need to provide the egg and the chickens.
Yeah, I mean, I
Like we
agree.
can't wait for people to show up. We have to provide this.
Exactly.
Okay,
I
there you go.
agree with you. I think my point was more that we need to position it to the speakers and to the camps that, hey, you may not see a significant uptick in attendance for these sessions for a couple of years because
Right.
we need to get the message out about it and we need to have the backlog of it. But it's something that we need to do for the long-term health of the program. Because like John said, as a speaker, there's not really if I'm an experienced speaker, there's not a huge incentive generally for me to give a more basic talk, I guess is the word, over something novel, right?
Right.
And for camps, if it's not driving, we're catering on some level, we're catering to our audience, the people that are showing up, but we also need to cater to the people that we want to show up. And so it's
Right.
just something to keep in mind, not something that we should avoid doing.
Right. And
Right.
we also want to make it easy for camp organizers to do this. Like that's and that I've got some. This is why I've been talking to other trainers about this. And I'll speak for myself and for Drupal Easy. Like I'm absolutely 100% fine with creating one of these beginner sessions. And for me, it'd be relatively easy for me to do that because I have all of this existing training material that I use in my classes that I can pull out and turn into a 45-minute session. I'm more than happy to do that and open source it and allow other trainers to or other session presenters to use that at other camps. And I've got you know some pretty obvious idea. I think they're obvious ideas on how to scale that. Obviously, I want to talk to nothing's official yet because I have no. I don't really have bandwidth to organize any of this right now, but I don't think it'd be a big ask to ask other trainers and other prolific presenters to do something similar.
And I think, like, to Nick's point, like, it might not be appealing to presenters, right? To do a basics presentation. I mean, like, I don't know, it feels pretty appealing to me because I
I
already know it. It's
I know.
easy, like, "Hey,
It's
let me put a slide deck together
yeah.
about views." Could do
Well,
that,
how about
like,
if you already how about if someone gives you the slide deck? Then
I
it
mean, like,
becomes
yeah, or
yeah.
that, like, it's very I don't know.
No, I don't think we're gonna have an issue getting presenters, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I don't think that, especially if the curriculum or the slide deck and the notes are there.
Right. Yep.
People who like presenting, like me and like you, they like presenting, and if you give them the tools and give them a slot and wind them up, and there they go.
Especially if
45
there's a
minutes straight.
previous session they can watch to, like, get also the highlights and cadence and types of
Yeah,
questions to expect and that kinda thing. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
pretty
and I
pretty
think the other side
I
of
agree.
this is we wanna incentivize, like, high quality presenters and training organizations to create and maintain this material. The hardest part about any of this and, any the hardest part about any curriculum open source curriculum development is not the initial writing of the material, but the maintaining of the material.
Sure.
Yep.
So that's something that, I think has to be a part of this where if a training organization or someone on their own wants to be part of this, they would agree to not only create the deck, but to keep it up to date as well. Like we just need to make this easy for event organizers to say, hey, I've got a room. Here's the 5 beginner sessions we're going to offer. Let's just find 5 speakers and call it a day.
I like it. You touched on it a little bit earlier, about the Drupal community's good at technical things. Um, do you think there's any other reasons that the Drupal community got away from the basics?
I, I think, because people like presenting on new and novel things. I like presenting on new and novel things as well. It's kind
Mhm.
of a little bit of a, it's a little bit of a flex, it's a little bit of, showing, just demonstrating something that you've learned. And I think it's also, it, it, it just kind of naturally happened because Drupal got more complex and we all had to learn more complex things. So that's where our mindset was to present on more complex things. But I think it's gotten away from us a little bit and we've got to, luckily I got a bit of a perspective check by one of my students who asked that questions. And I just think as a community, we need a little bit of that perspective check and remind ourselves that, hey, we need to like get more people in. So
So, I mean, I get like obviously Drupal CMS and AI and like Drupal with AI. Those are all like hot topics. They're new topics, right? And I get how those would be appealing to folks. But going back to Kathy's question a little bit, like, do you think those things have detracted from the focus on the basics? Like I would assume you would say yes, but I'm going to let you answer the question.
instead of detracted, I'm going to say distracted from the
Yeah,
basics.
okay. Yep, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
let me follow that up with like does a does a views training from 5 years ago
Yeah.
or even 2 years ago, if it exists, look different than a views training today?
Not at the foundational level. Nope.
Yeah,
So then
Views hasn't changed since
Yeah.
Drupal 8,
well, right. Okay. So if views hasn't changed,
Yeah.
then
appreciably.
what I'm gonna be like kind of a little bit of a naysayer here, I guess. But like, what's the impetus for like creating or delivering a new presentation on views if the training video from 5 years ago could be used to you know fit the same satisfy the same need basically.
Well, because I'm talking about events, right? People want to go to events. You know,
Okay.
nerd events are fun. Drupal events are fun. PHP events are fun. We want to bring, but it's especially valuable to us to bring new Drupal developers. Like when we get them at an event, we need to like catch them with a net, but we need to keep them. And the community, as a community, we're for the most part, we're really good folks. I'm saying that,
Yep.
jokingly, obviously. So like once we get them to an event, from a social and from just a welcoming standpoint, we got that part down.
Got it.
But if we've got no meat on that bone, if we have no, nothing that's going to give them more confidence with Drupal by the end of the day for them,
Yeah.
as nice as we are, you know, it's kind of a waste of their time.
It also provides a
I
little
feel
Well, it also provides a little bit of a collaborative environment, right? So, like, when you're watching a video from 5 years ago, it's probably not super easy to ask a question, right? So, like,
Yeah.
I feel like that could be another factor here where it's like, "Hey, come to this talk. We're gonna talk about views, and then you can ask all your questions, and some expert will answer them."
it's also going to be, people think it's stale, even if the underlying concepts are still valid today, not because it's stale, but just because it's stable. But if the only training you have is 5 years old, people will be like, "Well, this is obviously out of date and not valuable." But like Mike said, we if somebody's new to Drupal and they think like, "Hey, I'm gonna go to NedCamp," they show up to NedCamp, and then all the talks are about, well, here's how we overhauled the module handler to handle object-oriented hooks, right? That's a talk I'd love to go to or give, but they're gonna be like, what's a hook?"
Yeah.
And why does it matter that, what's a module handler, right? But if we have a track for them, they can get integrated with the community, and
Yeah.
that's the piece that we need if you wanna
And
we wanna add them to community.
yeah, and real-time training, whether it's via Zoom or in
Yeah.
person, that's, that's why my business exists, right? Because people value real-time collaborative training, right? So as opposed to, going to drupalize.me, they're awesome. And, they're actually partners with us. Our students get access to drupalize.me, but it's a different experience watching a video versus being either in person or on a Zoom with other live humans.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Mike, I'm sold on this concept.
My work is done. All
I
right,
think that
fantastic.
well, I mean, come on, you had me at Drupal Camp, New Jersey when we first talked about this, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering how do we get more basic talks at Drupal events, both from how do we, if somebody's listening to this right now and they're either a presenter or an organizer, like how do we get them to say yes, you guys are right, we need more event, like, more basic um information, whether it's session or full training at Drupal events, like how do we entice them to do it?
Right. So I think here's what needs to happen. And, maybe later this summer I'll have bandwidth for this. As you know, I'm part of the IXP program, and that kind of has my contribution focus right now. Um, but I think we need to identify, you know, 5 to 7, you know, um, let's call them. I don't want to call them training companies, but 5 to 7 people slash organizations who want to participate in this. Those 5 to 7 kind of self-organize and say, okay, well, you're going to take, user roles and permissions. You're going to take, you know, basic field API stuff. You're going to take, you know, views basics. You're going to take, relationships and contextual filters. You're going to take add and contribute, whatever. Like figure out what the topics are, figure out how they kind of fit together. And then each of those organizations creates a deck and maybe some speaker notes or something like that. Um, with that content done, honestly, I don't think it would be that difficult to convince event organizers to adopt that as a track. I know Florida Drupal Camp, it's already done and decided. Like, we're going to do it next year. Um, and I know other camps that I've talked to in unofficially or casually have interest in it. Um,
Yeah, I
And
mean,
I know I mean, there's a lot of presenters out there who if you give them a deck and a basic topic, they'll do it. So I don't think it's that big of a the initial work is just getting those 5 to 7 people organized.
yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily see it as a hard sell either for
No,
presenters. Like even if I had to develop the content like on my own, like
yeah,
I'm already thinking about an outline for a basic views, session where you can go through building out, basic views based on umami and like how you can, bring in different aspects of views to make that worthwhile. This is not something that I've brought to the rest of the organizing team for New England Drupal Camp, but I think one of our tracks will be focused on basics this year, and I know that we always try to offer a basics training as well. So I mean, I think that
yeah.
from the organizer standpoint, like your pitch is valid, and I think that it's kind of a necessary thing for sure.
Yeah, and I think down the road, it'd be great if we could somehow, obviously be contribution credits involved with both the deck authors and the presenters. I'd be fine with the authors of the deck having some branding on each deck, right, as a way to kind of promote themselves as well. Um, I actually think, once that aspect of it is in motion or working, I think there's another side of this where we can provide resources to event organizers. And honestly, this could be something as simple as a doc page for event organizers that basically says, hey, if you're going to offer this beginner event, here's various types of groups or groups with a lot of local chapters that you should reach out to in your community. PHP
Mhm.
groups,
Yeah.
general web development groups, girls who code, all of those, kind of community grassroots groups. you know Now we have something to provide to them, like, come to our event
Yeah.
and we have this for you. So I know a lot of this is not completely, you know, fully baked, right? It's still kind of percolating in my mind, but it just seems like a no-brainer to
That's
me.
that's why we brought you on, because we love non fully baked ideas
Yeah.
and extrapolating on them.
Yeah.
and
If
percolating
someone
off.
wants to take this and run with it, I will be their biggest cheerleader. Yes.
There you go. If you want Mike Anello to cheer you on in your all your Drupal glory, this one's for you.
If nobody does it
So
though, eventually it's gonna just I'm just gonna I'm gonna end up doing it at some point. But now is not the time
I
for it.
mean, I feel like it's a good, it meshes well with the IXP initiative and the Drupal University initiatives that we've recently talked about because,
Yeah.
it is the kind of thing that you probably want to, if you're doing a Drupal specific university course or thing like or initiative like that, you definitely want to have a views chapter, right?
Yeah.
Or a couple of chapters on views. So it seems like it would be something that would mesh well and you could share some efforts there. But if I'm an organizer of a camp, what do you think is a good mix of this type of content versus, the shiny new thing or just a, case study type content? Like how much of this basic content should
Yeah.
a camp provide, do you think?
It, it's a great question. I mean, it kind of depends on a few things. Obviously, the size of the camp, as far as numbers, actual attendees. Also, the number of simultaneous tracks. Like if an event only has 3 simultaneous rooms going, it's a big ask to get 33% of them for the entire day, right? One track for the entire day. So I don't think there's not one answer. There's just too many big variables. Um,
So hypothetically, a
yeah.
camp that has about 100 to 110 attendees has 4 tracks and 5 sessions in each of those tracks. What's the perfect number? I mean, I'm thinking of the regional camp that
Yeah.
has 4 or 5 tracks maybe one day.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Is it a
I
couple
I think
sessions?
if you've got 5 tracks, I mean, I think it should be 1 track. I'd and make it
I
the
would
smallest room if you need to, but, and now even as I'm talking about this more, and I think it's something that you just said, Nick, you mentioned Drupal CMS, maybe the capstone session is Introduction to Drupal CMS.
Mm,
For these people they've learned some fundamentals, they've learned basic information architecture, they've learned a little bit of views, they've learned a little bit about contributed modules. That's enough to teach them, to show them Drupal CMS and have them leave that session with some confidence. Because that's honestly, that's what all these
yeah.
sessions are about. All these sessions are about leaving the room with confidence.
And do you think this does better as a track? Because I
Yes.
think in the past couple of years, we've done this more as like a half day training.
I like, that's great. Okay. Half day train. I'm not, I don't want to like take away from that. I'm in Florida. We will still offer a full day beginner track. Um,
Okay.
But what this does is this gets new Drupal developers or people, not super confident Drupal developers. They get them involved with the big day, the sessions day.
Yeah.
Where we have the biggest attendance. Everyone's having lunch together. There's lots of networking. This gets them involved in that day because today, these days, if you're a new Drupal developer, you might come to that first day full day workshop, half day workshop, and have a great day, but then you show up the next day for sessions, and all that good mojo is gonna melt away because there's very little, if
There's
anything, for
nothing
you
for you.
on
Yeah.
that day.
It also could be structured in such a way where it's like, hey, that intro to Drupal training is kind of like all of those basics, set it up, configure a content type, so on and so forth. And then
More
like,
hands-on, yeah.
yeah, and then the second part, the session day is more like bite size, like, hey, here's views,
And
here's
you can pick and choose.
layout builder, here's the block system,
Yeah.
here's the
Here's
web
responsive images.
right,
Yeah.
image style and responsive
Might need
images.
a double session for that one, but okay, yeah.
Web forms, like, hey, like here are all these basic things that we know you're going to need to do, but like
Yeah,
we don't come right out and talk about them because we've moved on to new
yeah.
shiny stuff.
And I don't think we wanna, like, I can I think we should kind of coordinate with the different sessions, the different beginner sessions to make sure there's not a whole lot of overlap, there's no big gaps between them. I don't think we wanna have any coordination between any full or half day training. beginner training
Right.
and the follow-on sessions.
Because there could be different audiences there too, right?
Different
Like,
styles, different audiences. That's a bridge too
right.
far, I think.
Yep.
I'm really good, as we talked about with the IXP initiative, I'm really good at saying no. Like I am, that's one of my special skills is just I can narrow that scope to what I think, based on feedback, but I'm kind of the idea hatchet man sometimes with some of this stuff.
Feel like the next time AI writes a bio for you, it's going to be like notable honorable mention module maintainer and saying no hatchet man.
Prolific naysayer.
Mike Anello
Biggest cheerleader.
has been hacking people since anyway.
Well, but we've all seen all these like initiatives that are just overly ambitious, and then they don't go anywhere, or they just kind of peter out.
I
You know,
a number of conversations at DrupalCon about like kind of getting new things started, and
yeah,
my biggest takeaway was start with the basics. Get an MVP,
yes,
right? Like, yes, this could balloon or spiral into something else, or well, I should say grow because balloon and spiral sound negative, but like this could grow into something else. But right now, let's get to the MVP. What's the smallest piece that we can do that will show that this has value
yeah,
and that this is important?
yeah, absolutely, agreed.
Besides, um, like Drupal credit for speaking, uh, being topics that you just know off the top
Yeah,
of your hand, um, I can see presenting on a more basic talk might not be like exciting or
yeah.
enticing to presenters. Um, how do we pitch it to them to be like, this
I
is
don't
still
think.
good?
Yeah, I don't think it's honestly, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I don't think it's going to be that difficult. I think anybody in the training space is going to do it because it's exposure, right? And I'm speaking for myself. So there, we got those folks. Um, People who are passionate about the community and enjoy presenting, I don't think it's a big ask. A lot of people that I've talked to about this who kind of fit that mold are like, and you're going to give me the deck? Sure, no problem. I think, people who want to raise their profile in Drupal, you know, this is a nice way. It's great when an event reaches out to you and says, "Hey, we'd love you to present." That's a bit of an honor. I don't care, how experienced, in Drupal or the community you are.
If there
So
if there are any events out there that want me to present about Drupal basic things,
yeah,
feel free to reach out.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, if you like presenting, this is a pretty nice little gig. I think organizers, and again, this is something where I absolutely do not want to be prescriptive, but I think organizers just need to be careful of, let's say that I'll use Martin as an example because he's not here and we can talk about him behind his back. Martin can present on a lot of different things. He's presented on AI recently and smart date and recipes, all in his wheelhouse. I think if a camp approaches Martin and says, "Hey, would you present this beginner talk on the block system or something?" I think as an event organizer, I wouldn't want to um, have that preclude Martin from also presenting on something else that he wants to present on. So I think it's kind of, we're asking a favor of this person. So, you know, yes, I understand there's not, camps generally are not going to give multiple sessions to the same presenter.
Yeah.
I think this is the exception, though.
I think that that might be one of the hardest pills to swallow, though, because as as an organizer, you're trying to build up the broadest spectrum of
Yeah,
speakers, right? And if you're
yeah.
saying one track is potentially all duplicate speakers, that's a
so
problem.
two things.
But it is something to consider.
Two,
It is something to consider
two things
as
there.
a carrot.
Two things there, right? One, Mike Anello, I don't know if you know how podcasts work, but Martin can listen to this and hear you talking about it.
You know what? I talked to Martin in Atlanta. He never listens to this podcast ever.
That
He
makes
said he
two.
doesn't even like it.
That
So
makes two of us.
yeah, I think we're in the clear
So
on that.
the other thing though too is like frame of reference, right? When we talk about presenters, right? We don't necessarily need to go after presenters like the four of us or Jacob Rockowitz or Martin or people that have been in the Drupal community for years, right?
Yeah.
Like the type of content that we're talking about actually is
Good for first-time
probably
speakers.
really, really good for somebody who might want to be a first time speaker or somebody who is, been in the Drupal community for 2 or 3 years, has a good understanding of some of these systems, right? And is trying to break out into
Yep.
more speaking roles, right? Like Nick, I see your point and hey, like giving 2 slots of your 20 slot schedule to one person feels dangerous, right? But I would say like, okay, instead of doing that, maybe we go to somebody who um is trying to build that profile on
Yeah.
Drupal, trying to build that
I
that speaking profile and say, hey, here's a content ready to use
I have a
presentation.
solution. I have a solution. Oh my god. The people that you don't select, you can reach out to them and be like, "Hey, we couldn't select your topic because it doesn't fit into those tracks, but we have a special track. Would you be willing to give this talk?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
I mean,
way
sure. So I mean, those are at least two solutions right there on how
And the
to
only thing
combat.
I'll add on to this is, again, these beginner tracks I feel are or beginner sessions are a little bit different because in, I would say, a lot of cases, it's going to be potentially new Drupal community members' first experience in a Drupal,
yeah,
live session like this. So, you know, I think it's important that the people presenting are presenting with confidence and presenting well. And that's, I'm not precluding anybody from that. But I do think, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So we want,
yeah,
I think we're going to want strong presenters who confidently know the material doing the presenting.
Sure.
Because we want to, like I said, we want to capture these people with a net and keep them.
It
So
also probably lends itself to a better Q&A session if you know somebody that's kinda
yeah,
like have somebody that's been around the block a little bit, right?
yeah,
But, like, again, for me, like, I don't know, I'd be perfectly happy doing a beginner talk and not
yeah.
having to develop a whole new talk
Well,
about something new and
Yeah.
sparkling.
but think about this for a second. I guarantee you, right now, all four of us in our heads can think of multiple people in the Drupal community who who could do these sessions, but don't normally present,
Sure.
right? Like, I would love to be able to, open the door to that type of person who you see at a lot of Drupal events or have, some type of profile in the community, but don't often present.
I
yeah.
feel
And
like
give
Mike's
them, say, look, here's a beginner topic. You know, I know that you speak well. You know, go, go, go spread the word.
notice he didn't say that you speak good. That's because he speaks well. Um I imagine Mike just getting on the phone calling these people after this and being like, "So listen, develop talks." So I'm gonna put
I've actually talked to people about that before, but I always preface it by saying, this is just an idea I'm having. I'm not, there's no official thing, but if I asked, would you do it?
well, so I mean, like now that you've talked about it on a podcast, it's more than just an idea, Mike.
Well, but my whole goal
You've
for appearing here is to find someone else to do all the work.
yeah. Well, that's
It's,
fair.
I mean, come on.
I mean, that's the whole premise here is like somebody else does the work and you just song and dance it, right?
Exactly. I'm the hype man.
There you go. All right. So I'm gonna put on my naysayer hat again, for a
Lord.
second. I know, who wants that guy? But
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, do you think that this could adversely affect event attendance? Like, could it deter, more seasoned Drupal folks from wanting to attend events?
Uh, well, for that particular example, if it deters people from attending events because there's beginners there, do we really want those people in the first place, to be honest? I
Fair,
mean, I
fair.
would, maybe that's more of a personal bias, but I mean, come on. And yeah, the only downside that I could think of is we will be, in most cases, providing fewer non-beginner sessions.
But
You know,
so
there's probably some
yeah,
events that can add on a beginner track to what they already have, but there's definitely gonna be some events that have to, they have 4 tracks. They had 4 tracks last year, they're gonna have 4 tracks next year. So now we're asking for a percentage of those tracks to be beginner. So there are gonna be fewer potentially,
I
non-beginner
Yeah,
mean,
tracks.
but
how
I feel like
many
you need to add that track on though, because, like, just thinking about NetCamp, we have 4 tracks, it's 20 sessions plus the keynote.
Yeah,
We can't dedicate 25% of the tracks
yeah,
to we
I
like, we always have people that we're turning away, but if we add a track
right.
and we're asking people
no,
specifically or letting people do duplicate, we can
I
I think
disagree.
that
I mean,
I
I disagree. Uh,
like,
so here's the thing, right? I don't think we need multiple talks about Drupal CMS or AI or recipes, right? I have literally heard, I don't want to be negative Nancy here, and I know they're the new cool things, but I think that if you were to look at a camp that had 15 slots, right? So it has 3 tracks, five sessions. I think you could very easily say, "Hey, we're going to devote 5 tracks to beginner content and 10 tracks to everything else." In our case,
here's the
right?
problem.
Hold on, hold on. In our case, it's 20 session slots, right? 4 tracks of 5, right? So I very firmly believe that one of those tracks could be beginner content, and that would better serve our community than having potentially 2 recipes talks or, you know, 5 Drupal CMS talks, right? I think that diversity of content is more important than you know, adding another whole track to a day.
I I disagree, but I mean, we could talk about that on the organizing camp. But here's the reason why. You go to many, many camps and you go to DrupalCon. A lot of people regionally for a given camp don't. And so if you don't have those talks about the new thing like Drupal CMS, which is also it can be a beginner talk, but if you don't have like the Drupal CMS or the AI talks, which you may have heard in other camps, that's not going to attract the current audience either, right? So I feel like in most cases, I mean, if you have a 3-day camp with 3 days of sessions, yeah, you can probably just swap out a track. But when you just have 1 day of sessions, I feel like the cost of adding an extra room is negligible compared to losing
Yeah, but
That's greatly dependent on the camp, though.
I think
yeah.
the other thing there too is if you go, right, if you go from 20 sessions to 25 sessions, right? Now there's more people that are having to choose between more things, right? My I guess my preference is hey, dedicate a track to beginners because there are going to be beginners there, right? And maybe you don't accept 2 talks on recipes, right? Or maybe you don't have 3 talks on AI, right? You streamline your other content to say, "Yes, I don't disagree. There needs to be a Drupal CMS talk, there needs to be a recipes talk, there needs to be an experience builder talk, there needs to be an AI talk." But literally that could be 1 track.
I think the way that that will probably resolve this honestly is you look at the previous year camp and be like, okay, what 5 sessions would we drop and put
I already did
and
that in
put a
my head.
beginner
That's
yeah,
why
like
that's why
well,
that's
that's
why
what I
I
mean,
got
like,
this
we would
that's why I had this
we would look
viewpoint.
at yeah, I think that's what we need to do is we look at last year's schedule and be like, "Okay, what are the 4, 3, 4, 5, whatever number we choose that we would drop in this case, do it, or should we just add one on?" And if we're trying to get new speakers too and we're reaching out to them like Mike suggested as one of the possible solutions, I just think adding a new one would be easier. But yeah, obviously we'll discuss. I'm sure this will be one of many
Oh
discussions for
man,
this year's organizing.
I feel like it's going to be a hot button.
Yeah. I think for camps that have the flexibility within their venue, that have that extra room, I I think the majority of them will just add an extra track. But, there's definitely
I don't
events
disagree
out
that
there.
like
Yeah.
either way is better. I think the point
Yeah.
here is
This is the problem we want.
like hey, let's get the content in the camp schedule. Like
Yeah.
however we do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think with having more general talks, you fulfill that in-person void for the basic new person. The person that's coming for advanced
Yeah.
Drupal talks, they have a community in Drupal already. So
And they're
the
not going to all
support,
the sessions anyway. They're,
yeah, and they're more apt to
hallway
like
track.
find that online video or more advanced skill and spend those 2 days poking around and doing it. Um,
I mean, for me, like I literally at Drupal Camp New Jersey went to Mike's Drupal CMS training and was like he was like, what are you doing here? You know a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, hey, listen, like I like to just see what's going on, and like I always come away with one or two things. And like to be fair, I think that day I came away with three things, and one of them was a local instance of Experience Builder that I was like, okay, this thing is freaking cool. Like everybody should know about this, right? So like I don't know. Personally, I'm kind of like, oh, if you go to a basics talk, right, you might still get something out of it that you didn't necessarily expect to get out of it.
or be able to share stuff as a participant with other participants.
No, no, no. There's no sharing. I'm not sharing.
That's the cough medicine talking. Come on, man. Why?
So we have a question from Steven, I think, as he's listening to the show. Um, Mike, you had mentioned that, you know, one of the focuses of the most recent Drupal events has been, the age of the average attendee is going up as the age of the average Drupal developer is going up. Uh, there's been some talk about how virtual events are kind of more attractive to a younger crowd. Do you think that that's something we need to consider when building these tracks, or do we just try to get them to come to in-person events?
First of all, that definitely does not fall within the MVP, so no. But past the MVP, I don't know if I completely agree with Stephen on that one. I think, if you attend, any of the I don't live in Orlando, I'm about an hour away from Orlando, but I do attend events in Orlando. Um, those events are attended. I mean, there are people, who have a lot less gray hair than I am, than I have at those events. So, um, I think it's all about the content. I think it's, you can get younger folks, listen to me. Oh my gosh.
Get
You can
off
get those
my lawn.
whippersnappers. Yeah. People will attend in-person events if you give them a reason to, and our
Yep.
community, our welcoming nature, our friendliness, that keeps people, right? That doesn't, in my opinion, that doesn't get the people. So we need the carrot out there. We need the thing to get them in the door before we, smother them in niceness and good
I
vibes.
I also think like a V2 of this, or like the next iteration, right? Could be like an instance where like, hey, like there's a webinar series, right? Like
Yeah.
GovCon, Design for Drupal. There are some other folks out there that do webinar series. Ziz. Um,
You
and
okay?
yeah. I mean, just like how do you pluralize series?
Yeah.
It's always
Series.
weird. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway,
Series. Like
there's
the
no
World
Series
Series? I
is
don't
the
know.
plural.
series, is it? Well, okay. I didn't say I
I
was
don't know.
a smart
Is everyone
person.
else's iPhone going off? Because we've been saying
Yeah, mine
that
just
word.
did.
No.
That's funny. Anyway,
No, I don't
back
have
to
her
my
listening.
point. But like I think, a next iteration could easily be like, hey, let's move this into a couple of webinars where we're like, hey, like get on and talk about views, get on and
Yeah.
talk about blocks, get on and talk about web forms.
Once the material's there, the decks are there, you know, go nuts as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the hard part is getting the ball rolling. But once you
Feels
have
it almost feels to me like, and I've had this thought a few times during this conversation, but it almost feels to me that like the DA should be developing some of this content to kind of support.
it is so difficult to ask the DA for anything, not because they're difficult. That didn't come out the way I intended, but their plate is full. Right?
Sure.
Their
Right.
plates are full, and they are doing great work in the areas where they're working, but they don't have bandwidth for stuff like this. This is something that we can do as a community without the DA's involvement,
Sure.
and that's what we should do. We should do like we don't like we do not. I don't think we ever want to be in the position where we are reliant on the DA for.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my point was like it could be community created, but I think like fostering it and maintaining it and circulating it could be like a function of the DA
I
maybe. I,
would
I don't know.
I would say that's the event organizers group,
I
right?
mean,
They've got a
Oh,
the only
formal
thing I
group.
can see
Yeah.
in the beginning is just like a place on Drupal.org to help host this stuff. Maybe.
yeah,
Event
Um,
organizers group. Yep,
you think so?
man. Yeah.
absolutely.
All
This
right.
is,
Fine.
you
I'll
know,
take that back to my next board meeting.
uh, none of this works without event organizers on board.
Yeah.
We can
Uh,
sit here and rant and rave all we want, but we need event organizers to say, yes, we're going to do that.
Um, you're the Florida Drupal Camp
Um,
organizer.
I
One of.
well, I am. Um, I was for a very long time. I helped do the fundraising, the sponsorships, and I'm in the organizer channel and stuff, but I'm definitely not the lead organizer by any stretch.
Yeah. When is that?
February.
February.
February. Yep, we just had it a couple months ago. Yep.
Wonderful. And so you
Yep.
mentioned the next Florida Drupal camp, you're
Yep.
gonna have the basic session. It's already in.
Yeah,
So
honestly,
if
I
someone
I
else doesn't pick this up by February of next year, you'll have
yeah.
that outline ready for everybody.
Oh, God willing, we will not be the first camp to have this. Summers
Uh,
are, I'm on a teaching schedule basically, right? I teach 2 semesters, one's going on right now. I teach one in the fall. I largely have summers. I'm not gonna say off because I have client work, which definitely happens, but I have more bandwidth. Um, so, Ned Camp is definitely, on my radar because you guys are November, I believe. So that might be a good goal to have something for Ned Camp. I forget what else is in the fall other than, I know DrupalCon Europe's always, in the fall. But is there a camp that's normally like September? Actually, you know what? Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit is the same time as DrupalCon Europe in October. So that might be a, potential as well. I don't know if there's any camps that are routinely in September. I'd have to.
so
When's
if
Twin
anybody's
Cities?
interested
Yeah.
We're
in
usually
co-maintaining this, they'll they can reach out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Foster
I
this
will help.
idea. Yep.
I will help. I will provide guidance. I will cheerlead. I will help spread the word. I will provide contacts. Um, in the short term, I can do all of that. Um, once I get past this semester, which is really another month. Once I get to May, I'll have, and depending on where the IXP initiative is at the time, hopefully my band will start to open up. And um, yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I honestly think this is like important for the future of Drupal.
so Mike's contact information will be at the end of the show. And if you're interested in pushing this forward, you can reach out to him. But note, he's very busy and he will guide you, but you're on the hook for doing it yourself. Is that kind of the gist?
Yeah, I mean, the last few words, doing it yourself, they won't be alone, but, they're,
All right.
I'm
There will
looking for, we need some folks to kind of like carry a lot of water on this one.
there you go. All right. Well, Mike, as always, thanks for joining us and thanks for kind of bringing this topic up. I think
Yep.
it's important, and I think that hopefully we'll get the word out there, and somebody will pick this up and run with it.
Always great spending time with you all. It's always fun.
You're sweet.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on social media with the handle Talking Drupal or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
You can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest host, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron by going to talkingdrupal.com and selecting the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right, as we teased earlier, Mike, if folks wanted to get a hold of you to talk about this topic or Drupal Easy or any of the other great things that you do, how could they best do that?
I'm Ultimike pretty much everywhere. Drupal.org, Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads, Michael Anello on LinkedIn. Wow, that's
I think that's a different social network.
okay.
But
I'm gonna grab that domain name immediately.
there you go.
LinkedIn, X as well. So yeah, just Ultimike, and my
And
contact form is open on Drupal.org as well.
and how do you spell Ultimike?
ULTIMIKE,
Because
because I played a lot of Ultimate Frisbee in, you know,
so that
in
makes
my
way more sense, and it's gonna help me spell that. Because like,
yeah.
I mean, I know now because I've done it so much that it's a U, but man, every so often I'm like, what? How? Anyway,
So you're putting something instead of a U? Like
yeah, ALT, alt.
oh, like alternate mic.
Yes,
Yeah.
but that
There's
was like
actually
that was like years ago. I haven't done
yeah,
that recently because I know
yeah.
better. But anyway,
Someone created an evil Ultimike, I think it's on X account, and occasionally posts
huh?
evil Ultimike
That feels like a Mike Herschel
Oops.
thing. I feel like Mike Herschel might have been.
I would, that is my leading theory at this point, yes, yes.
All right, moving right along. Kathy Beck, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, how could they go about doing that?
I'm on the socials, kbeck303, or kbeck@oomphinc.com.
There you go. Nick, what about you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on the internet at picozzi.com, on the social media and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one.